Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. The Our Driving Concern Employer Traffic Safety Program is pleased to be able to offer a webinar titled Applying the Principles of Emergency Management to Emergencies on the Road. I want to welcome our presenter this afternoon, Betsy Kolakowski of the National Safety Council. A few things to note before we get started. Everyone should be muted, but just in case, if everyone would press *6 to mute, and that's for those of us that have called in via teleconference. So if you guys will do that real quick, just *6 on your phone. That will keep the background noise to a minimum, and then we'll also keep anything confidential that you have going on your end. You do have the ability to type questions during the webinar. The presentation is also available via attachment, and so you should see that, so you can download and print for this webinar, or you'll have it for later. The presenter may answer any questions that you have during the presentation, or you can choose to address questions at the end. If you should encounter any problems or issues, please type a message and let us know. The presenter's contact information will be available on the last slide. There is a very brief post-event survey at the conclusion of the webinar. Because this program is funded through grant dollars and provided at no cost to employers, we would greatly appreciate your feedback. And with that, I welcome Betsy, and we'll turn it over to her to begin.
Great. Thank you, Deanne. Again, I'm Betsy Kolakowski with the Oklahoma Safety Council. I've been a safety professional for about 30 years now, and I just recently completed my degree in emergency management. And it's kind of given me a new way of looking at things, both as a safety professional and as an emergency manager, how we address emergencies when they occur, either in the workplace or on the road or wherever we may be. So today we're going to talk about emergencies on the road. And the very first thing that a safety professional likes to do, we all like to do it, well, we don't like to do it, but we know it's a good thing to do, is that we want to do a probability or hazard assessment. We want to know what hazards are likely to occur, what hazards could come up, and doing a risk assessment is a great way to do that. So in Oklahoma, we live in an all-hazard state. That means we have every potential emergency that could possibly happen has either happened here or has the potential to happen here. In the emergency management community, we plan for all emergencies. So it's really hard to try to cover everything that we could have come up in a very short webinar, but I'm going to give you some ideas and some things to think about that you can work on in the future. So the first thing that we want to look at is the probability versus the impact. What kinds of things are we most likely to have happen? I don't know about you, but I've never had a flat tire in Bug Tussle, Oklahoma. But if I did, that's going to be a high impact because I'm certainly not going to be able to get out of there. But the probability is actually very low. In Oklahoma, long-track tornadoes can occur at any time, particularly in May and again in September and October. I have been out on the roadway when it was November, and I just kind of got a feeling that the weather was going to get bad, and I thought, well, I'm going to pull over and stop, maybe get something cold to drink and go to the restroom, and as soon as I got off the highway, the tornado sirens went off, and I was able to get into shelter. So we do have those kinds of things that we have to prepare for. In Oklahoma, a 6.5 earthquake has not occurred, but the emergency managers are actually preparing for something that could happen of that magnitude because there's a probability for it. It's not as high, but if it does happen, the impact is going to be catastrophic. How often do we get involved in or at least see some kind of road rage or aggressive driving? There was actually a case of a hog that got loose on U.S. Highway 59 not very long ago. It was fatal for the hog, and the driver wasn't able to get home that day because the vehicle was totaled. So those are the kinds of things you want to think about. It's not likely, but it could occur. Winter weather in November. It can happen anytime, usually even as early as October, but all the way in through February and March we could have winter weather. So how would that impact your ability to get out and do what you need to do? When is there not construction on the Turner Turnpike? How does that impact your ability to get to where you need to go and get there safely? We know construction can cause delays. There can be more likelihood of crashes. You have to slow down, and some people don't. So those are some things that you want to look at when you're looking at probability versus impact. So you want to think a little bit about vehicle failures. What kinds of things can your vehicle have go wrong? Flat tires. I recently had a flat tire. I'd never had a flat tire out on the road. I'd had some in the parking lot or at home, but I was actually on the highway going to work one day and had a flat tire and had to address that on the side of the road. Fuel issues. You know, if you're not paying attention, you can run out of gas on the highway. Sometimes you can have problems with the fuel quality causing problems for your car. Your battery or alternator can go out. Your engine can overheat. Sometimes your vehicle just won't start. And what do you do if your brakes fail? So those are all things you kind of want to plan for. How are you going to address those? What if you're involved in a collision? It can be a very minor crash, just a fender bender. The vehicle may still be drivable and there may be no injuries. But if you get into something more serious, either the vehicle may be injured or you or somebody else may be injured as well. And of course, heaven forbid, there should be a catastrophic collision with a fatality. But we know those kinds of things can occur, and you have to be prepared. I've actually had to do first aid on the side of a road for a victim of a crash, very badly injured, was able to call 911 and get somebody to come out and help him in the middle of nowhere. It was on the turnpike down by McAllister. But actually, Highway Patrol was actually able to get to us really quick and get us an ambulance. In Oklahoma, severe weather can happen any day. It could happen today. It could happen tomorrow, even though it's not predicted, because that's just how Oklahoma is. Flooding accounts for more fatalities from weather than any other type of weather event. So the old saying, turn around, don't drown, it's true. You really need to plan for that kind of thing. Ice, snow, hail, tornadoes, fog is a big issue too, and whiteout conditions in wintertime. Plus the heat and the cold are all things you want to think about when you're planning for weather-related issues with your vehicle. In Oklahoma, we actually have had 2 hurricanes, or the remnants of hurricanes that have come into the state and caused flooding, the last being Aaron that flooded Watauga. So those are some things to think about. You may see violent acts on the roadway. You may have an aggressive driver weaving in and out of traffic, slamming on the brakes, speeding up, slowing down. Then you get into the criminal acts, the road rage, robbery, and assault. If you're in a marked company vehicle, they can see big bucks and think, hey, I can bait that vehicle into a crash and they'll pay me big money. So you have to be aware that if you've got your company name on the vehicle, I drove a car for many years, it can make you a target. So you have to be prepared for that. And then we have the roadway issues. I love this meme here because it says in England they drive on the left side of the road. In Oklahoma we drive on what's left of the road. And I don't know anywhere that has perfect roads. We all have to drive on what's available. But that can cause issues, so you have to be aware of those when you're out on the roadway. Then you also have the potential for cascading events. That's when things go from bad to worse. So if you've ever had a breakdown in a bad neighborhood at night, in the rain, you know how quickly things can go downhill, and you always want to be prepared for those kinds of events. Black swan events are the kinds of events that don't happen very often. They deviate from what's normal. It's extremely difficult to predict, and they're very unlikely to occur. But when they happen, they're usually pretty severe. The I-40 bridge collapse is an example of a black swan event. So was the Murrah bombing. We had a friend that was involved in the Murrah bombing. He was just 2 blocks away from the building when the bomb truck exploded, and a piece of that vehicle actually went through the windshield and embedded in the trunk of the car. So that vehicle wasn't drivable. It was confiscated by the FBI, and I don't know that he ever got it back. So in emergency management, we look at the 4 phases of emergency management. Number 1 is preparedness, everything you can do to get ready, response, recovery, and mitigation. So let's talk a little bit about how we would use those on the roadway. Preparedness is all about getting ready, hoping for the best but preparing for the worst, making hay while the sun shines. The time to prepare is not when the emergency is looming. You need to do it ahead of time. This is where we want to talk about our emergency preparedness kit. We want to plan, prepare, and practice. So what do you have in your emergency kit? I've asked Deanne to send you guys a list that I've put together of some things that you would want to have in your kit. The very first thing I have on my list is a high visibility vest, and that needs to be within reach of the driver so that they can put it on as they're getting out of the vehicle. We want you to be visible when you're out of the car. The safest place for you is in the car, and it's always better to stay in it if you can. But if you have to get out for any reason and there's traffic, a high visibility vest is one of your best means of protection. You may need safety glasses or gloves. Reflective triangles or magnetic flashers. We used to always use flares, but with Oklahoma with wildfire season, flares may not always be a good option because they can be a fire hazard. You want to make sure your phone is fully charged, have a flashlight with extra batteries, jumper cables, tools, things like that. An enhanced first aid kit is important to have. Most of the first aid kits you buy just have very basic items for minor injuries. But if you have any kind of first aid training and you're going to be able to render aid in any way, you're going to want to enhance your kit. If you have any special health needs, if you have medication you have to take, you may want to keep emergency supplies of those in your first aid kit as well. Any kind of an accident where there is severe injuries, you may need to have some additional things for blood loss or blood control. It may be a tourniquet, it may need to be extra gauze. Feminine supplies actually work really well for things like that. Most guys don't think to carry that in their first aid kits, but it's a great thing to have. Emergency food and water and those supplies need to be rotated out periodically. It has to be things that you would actually eat. You don't want to put in something in there that you wouldn't eat or that you'd have to be like life or death in order to eat it. You want to make sure it's something you'd actually enjoy eating. Winter weather supplies, you want to make sure you have plenty of warm clothing, extra blankets, food and water for those kind of situations. I recommend keeping a red rag or a red flag that you can tie onto your antenna if necessary, because if your car gets covered in snow, sometimes the antenna can still be visible, and if you've got a red flag on there, most emergency responders know to stop and help for that. In the summertime, lightweight, light-colored clothing, extra water, maybe an umbrella for shade. Something new that I've recently added to my list is a chamois. They're very absorbent, they're very multitaskers, so I actually put a chamois on my list. A pocket knife, a fully inflated spare tire. I found this out the last time I had a flat tire. My husband went to pull the spare out and it was flat. So make sure you have a fully inflated spare tire and check that periodically. Excuse me. And some of the new cars, especially the CNG vehicles, there's no spare tire. You have an inflation tank and that's all you have. But if you have room and you can have a place for it, make sure you have a good spare tire. Something like an emergency hammer to break the window if you happen to be in a crash and you can't get out of the vehicle. The seatbelt cutters are really good. Sometimes they come in a combo. But the big mistake that most people think is, or that they make, is they put it in the first aid kit and then put the first aid kit in the trunk. If you're trapped in the car and you can't get out of your seat, that's not going to do you any good to have that in the trunk. You want to have that within reach of the driver. So if you have a center console that's covered, that may be the best place for it. Towels, blankets, anything you can use to keep warm or lay down on the ground if you have to get under the car to do work, those are never a bad idea to have. Hand sanitizers, duct tape, baby wipes to wash your hands when you're finished. And something that's really important, and we're seeing this with the hurricanes in the east right now, is people don't carry cash. And in an emergency, if there's like some significant disaster, the first thing that goes down is typically the phone lines, the ATMs, and any kind of electronic banking. I went to Hurricane Katrina during the response there, and there was no way to get cash. If you didn't come with cash and all you had was a debit card, you didn't eat, you didn't buy gas, and you probably didn't have a place to sleep either because the hotels could only take cash as well. So you always want to keep emergency cash on hand. Even if it's just enough to buy gas, make a phone call, get some help, cash is important to have in an emergency. You may need a deck of cards, a book, a puzzle, something to pass time, especially if you travel with your children, because that can be sometimes the hardest part is the mental aspect of a disaster or an emergency. It's just, being able to stay calm and pass the time until help can arrive. If you travel with your kids, they may have special needs. You may need to have supplies for them. Also, if you travel with elderly people or other functional needs, any other disabilities, somebody might need special medical care or other special supplies. This is by no means a comprehensive list. It's just a great place to start. You need to go through and think, what do I need in the event of an emergency? And add to that list and add to your kit. We recommend using like a plastic tub with a locking lid, put everything in it where it's visible, but make sure that's secure in your vehicle, whether you have an SUV or trunk or if you're putting it in the back of the truck. You don't ever want that to become a projectile or a flying object in the event of a crash. You may want to put a list of what you have in your kit, either at the top of the box or on top of it, so that you can verify that everything is in there. And periodically you should go through and take inventory and make sure everything's still good. If anything expires, it needs to be replaced. Some other things you can add, sunscreen, bug spray, a tire gauge. A lot of fleet vehicles don't have a tire gauge in it. If somebody has problems with the tire, they really don't have a way to check to make sure that the tires are properly prepared and pressurized. So those are just a few things to include in your kit. Now, response is when you take the right action at the right time, and that's the key. It's the right action and the right time, and that's when you actually put your plans into play. It may be something as simple as pulling off the road but not getting under an overpass during severe weather. Maybe you need to delay travel. Maybe today's not a good travel day. Maybe you can do your inspection tomorrow. So just reschedule and see what you can do there. That's one way to avoid being in an emergency. Putting out your reflectors, flashers, or flares if you have to repair a flat tire. Maybe you've got roadside assistance you can call for help. But when I had my flat tire, I had a very nice Oklahoma Highway Patrol trooper stop and remind me that all I had to do was dial star 55 and help could be there. And he said, please let people know. And I put pound 55, but I meant star 55 on the PowerPoint, so just make a note of that. Anytime you need help on Oklahoma's highways, you can call star 55 or 911. And recovery is getting back to a new normal, and sometimes it's the same normal. Just repairing the vehicle, repairing the parts. Sometimes, though, it means replacing the vehicle as well. Excuse me. Mitigation is the only phase of emergency management that can completely eliminate the need for all other phases. So we always encourage people to think about how can we mitigate the potential for an emergency in the first place. So if you think about the things you can control, like your vehicle, having a good preventative maintenance program is really important for your fleet or for your personal car. Training your employees on how to mitigate hazards and how to be safe on the roadway. Having policies for them to follow, like safe driving policies, put away your cell phone, buckle your seatbelt. It's the cheapest, fastest, easiest way to save a life. Just put on your seatbelt. Planning out your route, making sure you have plenty of time to get where you need to go and not having to hurry. Monitor your weather conditions. Maybe you need to delay travel, or maybe you've gotten out and it's time to head back to the office and the weather's turned bad, which it can do in Oklahoma. Maybe it's necessary to delay travel, and you want to give them the authority to do that. And again, allow yourself plenty of time so you don't have to speed or get put behind by delays, because you really can't beat the clock. If you're late or you're going to be late, there's really nothing you can do about it. So the thing to keep in mind is that hazards are ubiquitous. They're everywhere, and emergencies can happen anytime, anywhere. But by applying the 4 phases of emergency management, you can mitigate your risk to protect your workers as well as your fleet. And it gives you the opportunity to be prepared to respond to an emergency that may arise. Again, it's the right actions at the right time, and that's the key. And that way you can get back to a normal or new normal as quickly as possible so that you can get back to business and get back on the road. So, kind of went through that really quick. Any questions? Deanne, do we have any questions?
I don't see that we do.
Did everybody get the list of what to have in your kit?
I'll send that out via email.
Okay, great.
Okay, well, thank you, Betsy, for such an educating webinar. And thank you to everyone that attended. We know your time is valuable. We hope you gained some useful information. And if you take a quick moment, fill out the post-survey webinar, and just check our website for future webinars. This webinar will be available in about a week on our website, and we'll bring you useful webinars in the future. And with that, thank you again, and have a great rest of the day.